And hello, everyone. Thanks for attending. This is the unicorn edition of our Recruiter Ask Me Anything series. Erin Haywood from Powered by Purpose is going to be our host, and we have guests from Dropbox, Facebook, Twitter, and who am I forgetting?
Netflix.
Netflix was added late, so I apologize. But thank you for joining us, Thomas. My name is Dennis Schultz. I am the Blacks in Technology New York City chapter president. If you're not familiar with Blacks in Technology, you can get information on our website, bitnyc.org. But we are exactly what it sounds like. We advocate for Blacks in Technology as a national nonprofit. And with that, I will just go over a couple of housekeeping rules so everybody understands exactly how this is going to be set up. If you notice, you are muted by default. You will have the ability to ask questions in the Q&A section at the end. We do have some pre-selected questions that the panelists will answer. If you have questions you'd like to answer throughout the presentation, you can enter those into the Q&A. And also feel free to use the chat function as well if you have any questions or suggestions on how the conversation should be steered. There will be also a recording of this online, so keep that in mind as well. So as you're thinking about the questions to ask, and if you don't want to be memorialized on the internet indefinitely, you may not want to ask your question, but we're happy to take your questions offline as well. And there will be the ability after the event to follow up with the recruiters as well. So with that, I'd like to introduce Erin Haywood, career coach and consultant. Erin has done a couple of events with us. She's a rock star. I love Erin. Erin's claim to fame is when she was without a job, she decided to leverage her network to get interviews within 3 or 4 days of being unemployed, which I thought was awesome. And her organization or company, Powered by Purpose, is an online community for diverse professionals looking to level up their career. So Erin, with that, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, if folks are on the line and they are looking for employment or if they have been deeply impacted by COVID-19, I relate and I can understand. And so I just want to say thank you for making the time. And we were really intentional and thoughtful about the questions we want to ask, really making it about the current environment that we're in, which can add some layers and some texture to how to network, how to brand yourself, how to make genuine connections when a lot of things are being moved virtually. And so a lot of questions have been around, well, how do we come up with the questions? We based it off of an intake form that we did with the first recruiter panel. In addition, based off of just comments and concerns that Dennis and I have gotten from the clients and community that we serve. So we're excited to have all of you here. So let's first start with everyone introducing themselves. So name, title, company that you work from, and then we'll dive into the questions. So Fletcher, why don't you start us off and then we'll go from there.
So Fletcher Hill, I work out of San Francisco and I am a senior technical sourcer at Twitter.
Awesome. Veronica, you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, my name is Veronica and I am a technical recruiter at Dropbox in the Austin office.
Thank you. Maureen, and then we'll end with Thomas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maureen. I am a senior diversity recruiter at Facebook, specifically focusing on tech, and I'm based out of the New York office.
Thank you.
And I'm Thomas. I am a talent coordinator at Netflix, and I am based, well, Netflix is based in Los Gatos, but I am in the general Bay Area.
Awesome, thank you. So this is our amazing unicorn panel. And so we're gonna dive into the questions. So a lot of things that I've been hearing around COVID-19 is business priorities are shifting. or if they're staying the same, they're just scaling really largely to meet the demand and need. And so some questions that the community has been asking around is, what skill sets or roles are companies now looking for? Has that changed or stayed the same? So I want to direct this question actually to everyone. So who would like to hop in and kind of share how COVID-19 has shifted either how you recruit, the skill sets you're looking for, the roles that you're looking for, et cetera? So who would like to hop in first on that question?
I can start. So this is completely like unprecedented times and uncharted territory. So for Dropbox, we definitely had to take a step back and shift our hiring strategy and focus on roles that are of high priority at this time. So what we have been focusing on are some of our infrastructure roles, since we are having a lot of traffic due to COVID, which is great for us. So we definitely had to hire for infrastructure roles. Examples are like site reliability engineers, infrastructure software engineers, is where we are focused on. And we also have roles where we're looking for really strong engineering managers to lead our teams as well. So yeah, definitely there was a shift and just focusing on those high priority roles at this time.
Thank you so much, Veronica. So it's sounding like engineering. If there are any engineers online, this is your time to shine. And would like to add on to that question?
Yes, this is Fletcher. So here at Twitter, some of the same things, obviously, we've had increased use on the platform. So obviously everybody's going to, Twitter for information on COVID-19. So obviously that's a primary focus for us. So we're focused on a lot of engineers, back-end engineers, as well as machine learning engineers, because obviously that drives where people get their information and things like that. So that's been a big focus for us. And yeah, that's been the biggest focus for us. We're still hiring, but obviously, again, in critical roles, as it drives what is really most important for us right now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So back-end and machine learning engineering. Anybody else want to add on to this question?
I can add on. So Facebook is still hiring. I've been joking that I'm actually busier now than I was pre-COVID. So it's been a lot of shifting, but we're still hiring. And by shifting, I mean shifting to working from home. We are still hiring across the board, primarily engineering, whether it be back-end, front-end, mobile, machine learning, infrastructure, all of that, you name it, we're still hiring. And then across a lot of our other verticals too as well, we are still hiring too. I think it really depends on the products that we're putting out. So there have been a lot of announcements made about messenger rooms or other products that are really working to make sure that the world is connected during this time. And so whether that is product designers, product managers, the folks who are really building out the product that people need in order to remain connected, we're still very, very much focused on.
Yeah, and it sounds like a strategy to kind of figure out, well, what are the high demand roles? Is really doing your research on the companies and seeing what are the products that are being, that are successful during this time or what they're planning on launching post. So definitely always do your research on the company and read the news and stay updated on things. Thomas, do you want to add anything to this conversation?
I think just to echo everything everyone has said, I think for across a lot of companies are going to be your engineering roles are really what's going to be the focus on. And so, but I do think that for Netflix, at least having like playing a dual role of not only just like tech company, but entertainment company as well. And so folks who have a background in meshing the two, there are very specific roles that we still are looking for folks and that are very high priority. But again, just to echo everything everyone has said, just a lot of things for a lot of positions for infrastructure, because we still need to be able to put a product out there. And then also just, I think what we've currently been seeing, and this is more so of anecdotal, but a lot of movement for our like UI UX teams as well. So as of late.
Erin, if I could add one other thing too is,
Yes.
and for us, because of we're being very purposeful in our hiring now, So we're primarily, in most cases, looking for senior and above. Obviously, we're remote. Everybody's, decentralized right now. So we feel like senior and above candidates can kind of come in with less, training or things of that nature and kind of hit the ground running. So a lot of our roles, majority of our roles are focused on senior and above. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well.
That's a good segue into the question that's actually going to be directed towards Veronica and yourself. Back in the day when you would submit an application, you would get the advice around go to cocktail hours, networking events, meet people for lunch or coffee. These are ways to elevate your application. But speaking with recruiters and just professionals in general, the inboxes just only for their mail and LinkedIn is oversaturated, because not only is there a huge spike in unemployment right now, is everything is online. So if there's an applicant who's actually completed their application for your company, but wants to move their resume to a level where that's actually being noticed, what strategies would you give to that candidate to get their application noticed by yourselves and other recruiters? So we'll start with Veronica, and then we'll have Fletcher add in too.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say leveraging your network. And even if you don't know someone, within the company, I would do my research within like LinkedIn or company website to see who would be the best person to contact that you can ask them to review your application, or let them know that you've applied and you're interested in chatting with them further about the opportunity. I think just leveraging people within LinkedIn and your network is a really good, I would say, like first step to having your application reviewed and like at the top of the pile.
Awesome. Thank you. Fletcher, you want to add on to that?
Yes, I totally agree. And I think this is a good lesson for people. It's like, always be networking, because there are going to be times where it's going to be more important than ever. And I think this is definitely one of those times. So again, echo Veronica, I would start there. There's going to be a lot of like virtual events as opposed to, events where you could just go to. So I would say be looking out for information where there's still events going on that these particular companies are going to be attending virtually. And that can kind of another avenue, because, just like with this event, there's going to be representatives from a lot of different companies. You're going to be able to get your resume in front of additional people. So I would say that's another thing that I feel like you'll definitely need to take advantage of now, because you're going to be less apt to see people in person. So you kind of got to go at it virtually as many avenues as possible.
Yes. So basically what I'm hearing is still leverage your network, right? Even if you're using online tools and platforms, but do your research, make sure that you're matching the qualifications that are outlined in the job description into your documents. I would say even more, make sure that your online presence is updated. Be active on these online platforms, because recruiters are probably going to be using these tools to source for candidates. And then two, a lot of recruiters are like, the competition is high. So what makes you stand out? So are you active on blog sites or, groups, or attending events like this and speaking on panels so that you're constantly being seen in that environment and space? These are some of the suggestions that recruiters have mentioned to me, just to make yourself a little bit more competitive in this very strange time that we're in. So to talk about some more strategies, there's some folks that you mentioned, Fletcher, earlier around wanting people to kind of hit the ground running, right? Looking for folks that have the qualifications needed to do the core responsibilities of the job. What do we do if we have career changers, right? Folks that are pivoting. Maybe they were a manager in a completely different industry. Will that translate to a manager in tech? What about our students on the line that are graduating? Our folks that are entry level that maybe lost their job? How do they pivot into that tech space? So Maureen and Thomas, what strategies would you give to somebody who's trying to pivot into tech right now, and are feeling, maybe I don't have the 10 years that's on the job description. What should I do? Who would like to go first on that, Maureen or Thomas?
I can kick it off. This is a really good question. I actually transitioned from being an attorney to a tech recruiter. So I definitely empathize with those who are making the transition into a completely different industry. It can be challenging at times, especially when you're hit with like a global pandemic. I think some things to keep top of mind is, especially if you are interested in product or engineering, especially now, there is a lot that you can be doing. There are a lot of people who are working from home. They are having hackathons. They are putting projects out there. They are trying to make sure that people are getting the right information. And so I would start to get your friends together, or even think yourself of like, what are the projects that I can be coding out right now that I can add to my resume to say that this is what I was doing during this time. And also being really active in like open source communities, contributing to code bases. These are real time places where engineers are living. So if they see you popping in, if they see you contributing, then they also let us know as recruiters, like, hey, I worked with this person on a project. Can we get them in? I think that they would be great here. So really be creative, think outside of the box as far as different projects and things that you can add to your resume that show that, one, you're taking the initiative, you're solving hard problems, you're working on your coding skills, and you're also connecting with the community that you're seeking to join.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You hit the nail on the head with that one. And I think the biggest thing is just really, for me, would say just working on your craft. And Maureen had mentioned a part of that as well, is just really take the time. And this is not only for folks who are making a transition, but even folks who are just looking for, have been working in the field or in an area. Like, take the time to really work on your craft, like hone your coding abilities. I know for on a coordinator side of talent, basically, having insight to like take home tests and things like that, and making sure that like you're putting out the best code that you can possible, and all of those things, and really work on it, because it is, as much as I know it is something that folks do for work, it is something that you can continually build on, and I think get better at, and with honing that skill and putting yourself in an open source community or in a community, you have the ability to not only put yourself out there, but then also speak to the level of which that you can bring to a company or into a role as well.
Yeah. So both of y'all are saying just be a go-getter, work on your craft, continue to seek out resources and opportunities that you can add onto your resume, your LinkedIn, your GitHub, your websites. The same can be said for folks that are trying to get into tech, but within non-tech roles. The same can apply. Think about even collaborating on these tech projects if you are a non-tech person. Another thing I would say is, if you're working on projects and you notice that you tend to do them by yourself, you could be missing an opportunity to get a referral or a recommendation, either from a colleague or a peer. It's always good to show, and it's also making you expand your network as well, that you are great to work with, that you're great to collaborate with. So it really does sound like continue to work on your craft and make sure to update your resume to help you transition into that new field. So thank you for those perspectives. All righty, we're starting to get into the nitty gritty questions. We're gonna talk resumes, especially now. I'm assuming that ATS, or applicant tracking systems, a tool that uses, that a lot of large companies like y'all's probably use to vet resumes. What are some things that you want candidates to know that could get them potentially pushed out of that tracking system because something's not formatted correctly on their resume or missing on their resume? But then also, just in general, what are some things that you look for within a resume to show that this person is qualified and that they did these projects and, we're seeking their skill set? So Maureen and Veronica, this is for you. So who would like to hop into that question? Resumes.
I can start. Yeah, so resumes, there's a few things that I would want to mention is, first, definitely tailor your materials to the organization you're applying to. And also, so by materials, I mean your resume and your cover letter as well. And definitely review the job description. There's going to be a lot of helpful hints and keywords in that job description. And just when you're, doing your resume and cover letter, make sure that your skills align with what they're looking for, and make sure they match. I would also say focus on the results, impact, and the outcomes. So definitely, instead of listing out your job description in your resume, I would say to demonstrate how those experiences translate to the specific job that you're applying for. And with that also, I would suggest using numbers. So enumerate when possible. So using numbers and metrics to demonstrate the depth and breadth of your experience. So for example, how many direct reports did you manage? How much budget did you have for that project? So definitely just make sure you're using numbers to quantify that. I would say resume length is something else that I would suggest keeping it at, hopefully 1 page. But of course, those that have a lot of experience maybe needing to do 2, but I would say 1 page resume length is appropriate. So just make sure that you condense it, but still have that really good content and information in there. And use the hierarchy of a resume to your advantage. So making sure you're highlighting the things you want to highlight all the way to the top. So, the most pertinent information, like your experience, and then maybe education at the bottom, or if you're a new grad, you're probably putting the education and intern projects at the top. So those are just a few things. And proofreading is also really important. So just make sure that you're proofreading your resume before you send it in.
Yes, those are, I'm writing some of those down. So hopefully just to highlight some, I always tell clients that I'm working with, treat your resume as the document you would take for your promotion meeting with your boss. That's what should be written in the bullets, not hey, I answered phones and I did presentations. It's more around, I hit these metrics, I hit these outcomes. This is how I helped the business grow and elevate. So I think that was a really good point to make around focusing on outcomes and metrics versus copying and pasting your old job description, which basically is talking about tasks that you've completed. And then of course, numbers. So Maureen, what else do you want to add to that amazing list of strategies already provided by Veronica?
Yeah, that was a great list. Something that I would add, if you are an engineer, if you've worked on apps, if you built out iOS or Android apps, add a link in there. Make sure that the project that you're adding actually work, that they are up to date, that they look good. We actually do click on those, and then we engineering managers also look at the work that you've done. So, even if it was a project from a couple of years ago, if you're going to put it on your resume, make sure that it works, that the link works, that it looks good. Some other things to add is that, making sure that your resume isn't too colorful. I think there's this tendency to make, think thought clouds and have all of the different colors in there. Keep it simple, literally list out what you're doing, make sure that it's easy to read. That really helps us on our end, just to be able to parse out what you're actually working on. And as far as I know there was questions on gaps or making career moves, I definitely would be very upfront about for example, if you're transitioning to tech, where did you get the skill set from? Did you take a boot camp? Are you self-taught? Just be upfront with that. A lot of times I'm on the phone with candidates and I'm having to ask them, this is great, you started from 2014, but how did you learn to code? And then they go into the backstory. We have more that we can be your advocates, and we can really make that story of how you made that transition and why you're making that transition. So I wouldn't say that you have to put everything on your resume, but if you did take the initiative to take a boot camp and get into tech and work on these other projects, definitely include that, and just think about how you're formatting it, what it looks like, making sure that it's that recruiters can read it pretty well, and make sure that your links work.
Awesome. Yes.
Also, link in your LinkedIn. I can't express that enough. Link in your LinkedIn into your resume. We do look at LinkedIn, and it just saves us half a second of having to find your name and figure out if this is you. If I can just click on a link, I'm taken to your LinkedIn page.
Awesome. So resumes do matter, y'all. No matter if you were referred or you feel like you're a shoo-in, make sure that your document represents your brand as best as possible. So for this next question, you know, there's so many things coming out in the news. I know that we mentioned kind of how your recruitment has shifted because of COVID-19, but some people are now, you know, trying to factor in, is this always going to be remote work? You know, some companies were talking about needing folks with multiple hats because you might be moved from project to project, that you might not stay in a particular role. So thinking more broadly around how COVID-19 has maybe shifted kind of the characteristics or competencies that you're looking for. And then, of course, a majority of our audience are folks of color or from underrepresented communities. And so, you know, thinking about, has COVID-19 shifted companies' priorities towards diversity and inclusion? What should I do if I am a diverse candidate? How do I make sure that that company is a fit for me? That there's a community for me, that there's people who I can lean on for mentors. So I would just love whoever wants to hop into this kind of to talk about the concepts of how COVID has changed the landscape for work. And then also, I'm a diverse candidate, you know, how can I make sure the company's for me? So who would like to hop in on that question?
Well, I can start. So from a work perspective, obviously, you know, Twitter, we was already really in this mode of decentralization. So this kind of just echoed a lot of what we've been talking about for the last 2 years. So, and, you know, so I think going forward, this is going to be the new norm where, you know, not a lot of people are going to go back to the office. So I think that's something important to keep in mind as you show up in interviews and things like that, is just given the sense that you can be relied on and all that. Because again, a lot of things generally used to start in the office, where now a lot of these things are going to start virtually. So I think that's just something to keep in mind. From a diverse standpoint, again, one of our primary initiatives at Twitter. So, and that hasn't changed with COVID-19. I think a lot of our goals and metrics and things on diversity still stands. And that's an echo that you hear throughout Twitter, the company, all the time. And is echoed by senior leadership. So that really hasn't changed at all. And, you know, managers, senior leaders are still being held to that. So I still think there's a great opportunity, you know, for diverse candidates and underrepresented minorities. So from a Twitter standpoint, it really hasn't changed a lot. And I also think now, because we're hiring maybe not as much as we were originally, this gives a lot of candidates a better opportunity, because, you know, the pool, you know, for diverse candidates, you know, is going to measure a lot of times the total population of candidates. Because if we was in normal state, you know, you don't get as many diverse candidates as you get other candidates. So I think it does create a little bit of opportunity, I think, if you're doing your research and your homework. And how you get in touch with those, how you leverage those opportunities, I would say you do your research. And again, you connect with somebody. There's a lot of BRGs and a lot of organizations within those companies that can help. I mean, I get, you know, emails and stuff through organizations within Twitter that identify with diverse population. And then, you know, you kind of spread the word from there. So I think those are just some of the things that I would highlight.
Awesome. Thank you, Fletcher. So it's important to do your research and try to connect with folks that are part of, you know, support groups within the company. So that's a really good point. Anybody else want to add on?
I can add on something. So we recently, like literally announced today that our future plan is to be moving towards a remote workforce. And one of the reasons that Mark gave in our Q&A was specifically diversity related. And so we understand that there are a lot of reasons why people don't want to relocate to the cities where our largest offices are. And this is such a unique time. Of course, it's brought on by a pandemic, which like none of us saw coming, but it's allowed us to really be able to pivot to make sure that we have the infrastructure to allow people to work remotely. And this will allow us to be able to hire the folks where they are. So, you know, tapping into different markets, being able to allow people more flexibility as far as where they work, where their families are, where they feel supported in and outside of the workspace will be super, super important moving forward. So I think that that's actually been like one upside that we've seen from the pandemic that none of us could have really seen coming, but I'm excited from a diversity perspective of what that means for our communities. You know, it means I can live in Dallas and still work at Facebook. Like that's totally a possibility. I don't have to sell my house in Atlanta. Like that's just like really, really exciting to me about the opportunities that is going to open up. So I think and that was just like announced today. He shared that. So I definitely encourage folks to take a look at that, but lots on the horizon to come.
Awesome. Thank you. It's a very valid point. Does anyone else want to add on before we move on to the next question, which is so exciting? Salary. Woo! So during our last webinar, we got a question around when is it appropriate to ask for salary? Two, just questions around when in the process do recruiters ask about salary? What strategies or tips would you give to candidates to figure out when a recruiter does ask, what are you expecting for this role? How can they figure out what is a reasonable band? What is a band? I just learned about that the other day. I didn't know y'all had bands. What is band? So really help our folks out. And the reason why this is important is because racial and social economic gaps and gender gaps when it comes to salary is a real deal. And so in order to kind of combat that is we need to talk about it, educate one another about it. So who would like to just talk about just educating the community around when should I be prepared to talk about salary? How can I figure out a number that's good for me to say? What is this concept called bands? So who would like to start that question?
I can start. So bands, what that is for every role or so like engineering, whether it be back end or machine learning or full stack or whatever. But then you have bands for non-technical roles like HR, administrative, program manager. So all these different roles have different bands. And within those bands, it's a low, medium, and high range. And why they set these bands is to make sure that the companies, those particular roles within the company stay balanced. You don't want they use those as gauges. So we're not, like you said, underrepresented minority. We don't want to be paying some people the high and then some people the low. So part of it is to make sure that it's equal across the board. The other thing it's designed to do is make sure there's room for people to grow. So like if you come in at the high, a lot of times there's really nowhere for you to go when you do well and you want to get an increase. It just allows less opportunity for those opportunities. So you either you get promoted or you don't get a good increase year over year. So band is just a low, medium, and high range, and it's role specific. So it's not the same for every role. So if you're an engineer, back end, all that stuff, there's a band for that particular role. Non-technical roles, there's a band. Me as a recruiter, and everybody has a different spin on it. Obviously, there's certain laws now where you have to tell people what the range is and things like that. And I think in some places you even got to list it on the job postings, right? But for me, I always advise candidates, no matter what you say you're looking for or what you want, is how you do in the interview. So I think we can spend a lot of time up front talking about numbers, but what does that matter if you don't get the job? So for me, I always tell candidates, okay, you're looking for a senior role or you're looking for a junior role, how you perform is going to dictate, because if a manager really wants you, they're willing to push the number. And sometimes they go over the number with an exception. So I try to spend, in my role, I try to spend less time on compensation and focus it on, if you're really interested, giving your best effort. Because if they like you and they love you, then the other part becomes easier. But if they're on the fence with you, the numbers don't really matter. So that's just my general stance on it.
Awesome. And I think you brought up a really good point. Do your research around laws. California, ask, right? In New York or Texas, wherever, it's different, right? There could be laws that are passed that recruiters can't ask you what you made at previous jobs. That's against the law now, right? So knowing these things is really important. So thank you, Fletcher, for bringing that up. Research, workforce law. Anybody else want to add on to this discussion around salary?
Yeah, I think one of the big things for me, or at least the advice that I've given, is being able to, like, willing to have that conversation about compensation. And it's super awkward just in general, but now it's especially awkward now, given the fact that there's just so much economic downturn throughout the globe. But I think that especially at Netflix, and I think at certain other companies, the willingness to have that conversation, willingness to have that conversation is a big thing. And so being able to say, hey, like, can we talk about comp? Can we just broach that topic and really bring in your own thoughts, your own ideas, kind of level set gauge and all of that. Because for Netflix, we pride ourselves, and I put it in air quotes, on doing top of market. And so if you have another role that you've just gotten an offer for, we encourage you and to bring that up and say, hey, I know you've come at me with this X amount of number or X dollar amount, but I've also found this on the market. And recruiters are recruiters and our sourcers / researchers are very upfront about having those conversations about what top of market means, how our comp philosophy is based on just the person and their experience, kind of with understanding of what the role is as well. So I think at different companies it's different, but I think always put your best foot forward and say, like, hey, when can we start this conversation? And then when that time comes, just jump on it, and be able to say, hey, this is what I'm looking at, this is what I want. And I mean, I'm saying it's a lot easier said than done, but I think just not shying away from it, because I know for Netflix, we like folks to be upfront about what they're feeling, what they're expecting, and see if it's the best fit for the both of us.
Yeah, very valid. Both of us is a key part, right? And I think too, you mentioned kind of the comfortability. I think with practice, it happens, and mentors have given me this advice, and I give it to the clients that I work with. Don't just focus on the annual salary. Ask about what the compensation package includes. That can include professional development training stipend. That can include relocation support if they were going to move you to a different location, health benefits. It could include stock within the company, etc. And then two, Fletcher mentioned this idea of like promotion. So you can also ask, what's your company's philosophy around promotion, around workers that go over and beyond? Do you get, at my old job, they would call them excellence awards, which were just like stipends that you would get if you did really well on a project or within your role. So asking as much of these questions could help you get an understanding of what the company's thinking about when bringing on an employee, but also you should factor in when you're asking for compensation as well. So educate yourself. That's the biggest piece of advice that I would say, and just get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Okay, so it's 7:10. We got some questions in the queue. I want to make sure that I allow for folks in the audience to be able to ask questions. And if you haven't already, make sure to add them into the Q&A part of the webinar. So one question is around any advice for international applicants, how to get visa sponsorships, or has that been impacted by COVID-19? So who would like to answer that question from the audience?
I'll start. So yes, so for those who are aware, for as far as visa sponsorship, normally the process is, if you already have an H-1B, for those who know what that is, it's like a work authorization to work in the US. And if you're moving from one company to the next, they have this thing called a premium processing, where you can get a receipt within like a couple weeks that allows you to leave one job and move to another job pretty easily. Well, currently right now, because of COVID-19 and the restrictions on people from out of US, that there's no premium process. So now that process could be 3 to 5 months, depending on the individual situation. So that has definitely affected, from an immigration or international standpoint, right? So, what was the other part of the question?
It just asked if
Okay,
time
yeah.
would be impacted, which is what you were talking about, which sounds
so
like
that's
the
the only
length of
impact.
time.
Yes, that's the only impact. But we're still moving forward with candidates as normal, but just making sure they understand that this process has changed. Where normally they could put in 2-3 week notice once they get the receipt and start. Now that could take 3 to 5 months, but we're still entertaining those candidates.
Awesome. Anybody else want to add on before we move to the next question? All right, it sounds like Fletcher, they let you take care of that one. So the next question is, okay, this one's kind of going off of the salary question. During an initial phone call, when a recruiter asks what salary you're looking for, is it best to answer at this point or prolong it until later on in the interview process? What's the best approach to even articulate that to the recruiter?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? My internet broke up.
So in the initial phone call, so like the phone screen, right? The recruiter asks what you want to make salary wise. The participant's asking, should I answer that right then and there on a phone screen, or should I prolong that towards the end, like the latter part of the interview process?
Well, one of the things, go ahead, Maureen, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think if you're having an initial phone call, you honestly have to know your company. So a lot of companies won't ask you about your salary and are banned from asking about salary in that initial call. We just want to make sure that we are telling you about the project that we're working on. Are you a good fit? Towards the end of the process, once we're in on-site rounds, once things are looking positive, once we're going through our internal reviews, that's when recruiters will start to have that conversation. But to the earlier answer that we gave, definitely do your research. If you're in a state that does not require you to share your salary, you don't have to share your salary. And I would empower you to tell the recruiter, I don't feel comfortable sharing my actual salary. Here are my expectations. A tip is don't give a number, give a range. So do your research, look at what should be in that range and give that range, but you shouldn't feel compelled in that initial call. Now, if you're interviewing with a startup or a smaller company, they might have a different practice. So I think it's absolutely okay to ask, can we hold off on this? I'd like to gather more information, but I wouldn't feel compelled to give that number so early on, especially when you don't have the data to support, the answer that you're giving.
Awesome. And then just to follow up, Maureen, in an application, there are applications that do ask for it, but won't allow for a range. Would you recommend that you choose the higher part of your range and put that number into the application?
It depends. Honestly, I would do research on, what are the salary expectations for that role. So you don't want to take yourself out of the running by putting the high end and then the recruiter says, oh, well, okay, they might not be a great fit. Or if they see a super high number, they might think, oh, this person is super senior and we're looking for more mid-level role. So I definitely think that doing your research is key, just so that you don't take yourself out of the running, but also know your worth. Like if I cannot live under a certain amount, then don't feel compelled to put below a certain amount, because then you might get all the way through the process and the offer isn't just going to be compelling for you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being transparent on that. Did anyone want to add to that? Thomas, you want to add?
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on what Maureen had said is just to also, as much as the initial any part of the conversation or part of your interview is for them to know about you, it's also for you to know about them. And so if it is, I would say just not as snarky as I'll say it, but try to flip the question on the person. So they're like, hey, what are your salary expectations? It's like, that is a great question, because I was wondering what your salary expectations would have been, so I can level set. And then they can go back. But I think just being able to understand that as much as you're interviewing for a position, you should take that as they're interviewing you. I mean, you're interviewing them for where you want to continue to work. And so if it is something, if they are caught off guard and like, oh, well, here's our range, and if it works for you and it doesn't, that's just one checkbox already off for you. But I would definitely, just try your best to give a range if possible.
Yes, and have dialogue. Recruiters are people just like you.
One other thing on the
conversation.
conversation thing to keep in mind too is like, a lot of it start with level, right? When you're having a conversation with somebody, like what level are you, because again, when I look at a resume, that's one of the things that immediately comes to my mind. I can look at your resume, where you've worked, how much experience, in all those different things. And it immediately tells me, okay, this person is a, senior developer, a staff developer, mid developer, or junior. So I think that's where you have to be realistic in your expectations based on who are you as a developer or whatever the case may be. So that's one of the questions I always ask candidates: what level are you currently at your role? And and I want to ask them that question because some candidates don't want to answer that question because they think you're trying to put them in a box. But you have to ask that question because the interviews are going to be based on what level you're interested in. So it's going to come out anyway through the process. But, yeah.
Do your research, do your research, do your research. Okay, awesome. We have another question. We have a couple questions. How should you approach trying to get a referral for a company you would love to work for? Is it better to reach out to a technical recruiter directly or reach out to an actual employee that works at the company? And maybe also just clarify what an official referral is versus like a recommendation, because sometimes I think people get confused on that. So who would like to answer that question?
I can start and then I have to hop out. But so I would be weary of just reaching out to a random employee at a company and telling them, will you refer me for a role? I think the best point of action is if you see a recruiter who's working on a specific role that you're interested in, then to reach out to them. Unless you know this employee, then absolutely. But referrals, at least from a technical standpoint, we'll be asking them, have you worked with this person? What are the projects that you worked on them with? So if they're not really able to give us that information, it doesn't necessarily help that they've referred you. So kind of understanding that aspect of it. And then also, recruiters are people too. So understand that inboxes are overflowing. It doesn't mean that you give up, but it's definitely, there's a lot of in-mails and emails that we're getting. And so just please do understand that we are reviewing, we are looking, we are reaching out to see who's a great fit. But with the volume, sometimes it's hard to get to every single person.
Awesome. And thank you so much for joining us. I know you have to jet out early, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen.
All righty. Awesome. Does anyone else want to talk about that? Like, should I go directly to a person that's in the role that I'm trying to go for versus hitting up a technical recruiter? Basically what Maureen is saying, like, know the person should know your work style, projects you've worked on, ideally has worked with you so they can talk about how that was. But anything else to add on to that question before we move on?
Yeah, and again, what can also help you is what I said earlier. It's like you can go to virtual events, meet people, start to build a relationship with them, and maybe then you get closer to where you want to go, where you've met somebody at an event, y'all have had some conversation, y'all exchange cards or whatever information, connected to each other on LinkedIn. And again, use LinkedIn. If you got somebody connected to you, if you connected to somebody, and then three down, they may know somebody that works at Dropbox or wherever, and maybe you can kind of work it that way. So those would be some of the other recommendations that I would.
That's some great advice. That's the loop around, is build those relationships. So that way the person can build off of your conversation if they were impressed by what you said, the projects, etc. Okay, so we have some more, so we're going to keep moving. Okay. Do you have any advice for entry-level folks trying to get their first job out of school during this time, especially for non-engineering roles? So wanting to get into the tech space, but for non-engineering roles, what would you give to our recent grads?
Well, there's a lot of programs out there. You know, a lot of companies have new grad programs where they are looking for those candidates right out of college, right? Obviously, we have intern programs, but those are mainly for people who are still in school. But there are new grad programs, and I think that's your best way because you know a lot of companies really try to hire from those programs. Also, with those programs, I think you get a bigger chunk of your diversity, right? You know, so I would say, you know, look at the companies that you're interested in, see if they have any new grad programs. And they always have events and things like that. So I would say that's probably the best way because a lot of recruiters like myself, I don't really work on new grad roles. Those roles are worked on by specific people who work with, whether it be interns or new grads. When we consider new grads at Twitter, we're talking about anybody who's graduated within the past 6 months, I think it is. So there's programs specifically for new grads, whether it's engineering or not, that kind of is an opportunity for you to interview and, you know, and get in.
Awesome. So look for recent grads, internships, even rotational programs or
Yes.
development programs. Those are things to also look into. Veronica, it seemed like you wanted to add something.
Yeah, and there's a lot of great talent out there and strong candidates. So I would say that cover letter, definitely you can leverage that and paint the picture that you might not be able to paint in your resume, and talk about those skills that match up with the job you're interviewing or applying to. So definitely have, you know, a strong cover letter to really outshine the other people that are applying to the program as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I think one thing for me having my past before working in talent, I worked as a resident director at a college. And so working with students and that were making the transition into the working world is just really having the idea of like, yes, you want to work at XYZ company or these big companies, but I think taking the opportunity to get whatever experience you can before trying to make that transition into a really big company or something that may be, or the company that may be a little bit of a stretch for you. And that's definitely not to say don't apply for whatever you want to apply to or whatever's going to pique your interest. I think it's just being willing to accept what's going to be put in front of you as an offer. And so if it is, you do start to work at a startup, and it's like, get all of that experience that you can. It took me moving from a contract role to a startup to Netflix to really, really understand all of the things that were going to be asked of me in my role, in my world, and then and get a bigger picture of that. So I think for new grads, definitely find the ways to get that experience, get paid for that experience. But also just leverage that. Look at it as a stepping stone to where you want to go, because it's not always going to be from point A to point B. You're going to go from different places and different iterations of what your job and your career is going to look like, especially for the folks leaving master's programs or even right fresh out of undergrad.
Awesome. I think to add on to that, Thomas, folks have kind of given me the advice around and I think Fletcher was mentioning it too, know the sub committees or companies that are associated with the company. So let's say large tech companies might have smaller startups that they're a part of, or they might have incubators or et cetera that are funding, and that could be a great place to start, and then translate and transfer those skills into the company that you want later on. And then also contract work. I feel like contract work is going to increase right now, and so there's hiring firms that tech companies go to hire temporary work or contract work. So that could be another way to kind of get your foot in the door, and that contract position could turn into full-time later on. So very great points. We have a couple minutes left and there's so many questions. I'm trying to think of questions that could be very broad because there's some niche questions here. Just really quickly, who wants to talk about if companies are hiring for sourcers or recruiters? Is that seeming like it's, you know, staying very lean right now, or do you see a future where there's going to be a lot of hiring in the future? So maybe one person can kind of tackle this so we can get another question in.
Well, I think by large, I mean, we're not really doing any internal recruiting hiring right now. And I think, you know, for the, you know, obviously we had an expectation of how many people we're going to hire. And then if you're not doing that, so it's almost like you have more people than you need. Now, thankfully, we're not doing any layoffs or anything like that. But yeah, from Twitter standpoint, I don't think we're going to be doing that anytime in the near future for sourcers or recruiters.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, awesome. That's kind of the flow that I've been hearing from recruiters, is that trickling here and there, but a lot of the emphasis is just on the high priority roles and retention of staff, keeping your current workers engaged and motivated at work. Okay, so next question is around, do you think companies would be could be willing to implement internships/apprenticeships for people in transition with no experience? It appears most internships are only for recent college graduates. Anyone want to talk about? Most of y'all I know have internships, but maybe they have shifted because of COVID-19. How can college grads figure out if a company has internships, not just for graduating seniors? I know a lot of you have what's called early engagement opportunities for freshmen all the way through seniors. Who wants to take that question?
So I can take it. So I know for Dropbox, we have a program called the Ignite program, which is basically people that want to get into the tech industry and into those engineering roles. So we have that program annually right now. So we are reviewing resumes and reviewing like projects that they've done. They could have, and they had no previous experience. So someone that has no previous tech experience, maybe went to a boot camp, or maybe just self-taught. So we have that program, which is really exciting. And we're hoping to continue that. So we give opportunity to those that haven't had that experience.
I think we do something similar at Twitter as well. So I think those opportunities are out there. Again, everything goes back to research.
Yeah, research. Yeah, and if you're a current student, definitely utilize your Career Center if your campus has one. If not, you know, your academic advisors should have relationships with companies, and you know, things might shift with universities going online, and that might shift, you know, recruiters actually coming onto your campus. So just ask folks in the Career Center, what should I do to make sure I don't miss out on opportunities to engage with university recruiters?
What is the name of your programs? That was one of the questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific brand or name that they should look for?
Yeah. I know it's an apprenticeship program. I'm not familiar with the exact name of, so I don't want to give the wrong information.
Okay.
Yeah, I know Netflix has one too, but the name is escaping me. And I would need to have to follow up with someone and get that information to y'all, but I know we have one.
Yeah, just Google what I usually tell students, either do university programs in the company name or internships at the company name, and it should bring you directly to the page for students. And so that's a way to figure out what opportunities are for students for the companies. Okay, one last question, and then we're going to transition out. Okay. There's this question around, if hired, will companies allow for me to work on profitable projects or companies on the side? And so that's a question that folks wanted to know if that's allowed or not, if hired.
This is again one of those things where, you know, every company, when you join, you know, there's a whole list of courses you got to take when you become a full-time employee at a company, or even as a contract employee at a company, that explains all these rules, right? So there's a lot of specifics regarding that. And especially like even if you're like a sales rep for Twitter, right? There's a lot of parameters as to what you can and what you can't do. If, somebody, comes in with an RFP, which is request for proposal. So there's just a lot of things regarding that. So I don't think it's like a black and white answer, but there are restrictions regarding that. And it's a lengthy doc. So I would say when you start engaging in with recruiters or whoever, make sure you bring that up if that's your intention, and they can kind of flush that out at that point. But there's a lot of restriction with that, as it should be, because of the type of work most of these companies do.
Awesome. So the main thing you want to think about with that question is, when you work for a company, you don't want, it's very proprietary, like the information and the things that you're engaging in, they want to make sure you're not sharing that out or using it for your own financial gain. And then if you do have a side business or you have clients of your own, if what you're doing with them is very similar or there's a lot of overlap, that could be something to mention, like Fletcher said, to the recruiters. And if it's something that's really important to you, mention it. They could find that to be attractive if you're a consultant or if you're, a business person. So I think it's always important to be transparent and have integrity, and not try to hide it. And then all of a sudden it comes out when you're hired, especially if you're wanting to keep your business. So that's something to think about. It's 7:33. I know that we went over, there's tons of other questions. For the questions that were in here, we kind of mentioned it. One was around if you transferred from one role to another, like if you're a manager in one industry getting into tech, would that impact whether or not you could keep the same level that you're at in the salary? We mentioned that earlier, so make sure to do that. And then specific diversity and inclusion initiatives that your company has, or things that you do to make sure that folks that are underrepresented thrive. We talked about ERG groups and specific internships, apprenticeship programs, things of that nature. So make sure to do your research. And then lastly, we did a lot of conversations around maintaining company culture. That's something we didn't really touch upon specifically, regarding like how do you keep that company culture, knowing that your work might be 100% remote now. So that's a question that we didn't have a chance to get to. But yeah, I just wanted to say it was a pleasure being the moderator for this panel. I think we covered like a lot within an hour span. Yeah, Dennis, I just want to make sure you have time to, close this out as.
Yeah, just as a final word, I can attest to the fact that I've had a side gig for 20 years, and I've worked for a number of big companies: Dell, Samsung, Lenovo, Gartner, Dropbox. And as long as you disclose it, it's not been a problem. And as long as you're not doing anything that directly competes, or could cause a conflict of interest, I usually don't have problem getting through that legal hurdle. But I did want to thank the panelists. I know it's a labor of love to take an hour out of your day to participate and answer questions to strangers. So we do appreciate it. And we will be following up with you. For the participants, if you did want to reach out to any of the panelists, they do have LinkedIn profiles. You can find them. I found everybody pretty easily. And we'll be sending a follow-up email with additional information and the feedback form. Or actually, Erin, do you want to talk quickly about that?
So please make sure to fill out the feedback form, because there's going to be a question there if you want to share your resume with the recruiters. And what's going to happen is, for those who give us that consent, I'm going to send over a resume book for them to look at. So this is a great opportunity potentially for, if they like your resume, that you get your foot through the door. So Dennis will be sending out that email with the feedback form. In addition, I usually offer a free raffle for one lucky person to get a free coaching session with me. So 2 perks here: resume book and a free coaching session with me if you're the lucky winner. So make sure to fill it out.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.